When One Piece originally introduced the supernova, Bonney arguably was the least notable member of the group, but this has now changed. In over 15 years since her introduction, Jewelry Bonney, despite all odds, has among the 11 rookies become second only to Luffy, out of all things, in terms of sheer power. This is because after the events of the Egghead arc, Bonney in the current story is in possession of more military power than any pirate in One Piece outside the Four Emperors. But what this arc also revealed is that she is a complete freak of nature, whose raw potential surpasses any other character in the story. The scene that kicked the Hornet's Nest was when Saint Saturn ordered the Pacifista to kill Bonney and Kuma, and this pretty much looked like the end for them, where the two were sitting ducks for the Pacifista to shoot at, and the story had established that no one could stop these things if they'd been ordered by one of the 5 elders. Bonney, however, still desperately yelled at the clones of her dad, telling them to not fire but to help them, yet somehow this worked. The Pacifista all stood down and instead opened the fire on the Marines. The reason behind this was that when Vegapunk had originally designed the Pacifista, he had actually foreseen that something like this may well happen. Bonney had become a wanted criminal, which meant that there was a chance that the government would deploy these weapons against her. The idea that Bonney would be killed by someone who looked like her own father horrified Vegapunk so much that he decided to put a failsafe in the clones. Due to Vegapunk's sabotage, every clone that had been based on Kuma would obey Bonney over anyone else in the world, including even the 5 elders. I think I, however, need to add further context to underscore just how much military power this one move put in Bonney's hands. At a glance, an army of Pacifista might not actually seem like that big of a deal after coming back from their training over the time skip. Zoro and Sanji could, for example, defeat a Pacifista within a single page. This seemingly confirmed that these were weapons better suited for swatting down rookies in Paradise, and not for dealing with New World level threats. But just like Bonney herself, the Pacifista in the final saga have changed completely. On Egghead, we were introduced to the Mark III Pacifista. These are verbatim said to be far superior to the Pacifista seen in the prior story, where the Mark III have, for example, an upgrade called the Bubble Shield, which uses a special resin to not only defend, but to also deflect attacks. While we've yet to see the limits of this shield, the government soldiers on Egghead call it Vegapunk's ultimate defense. Offensively, these Mark III Pacifista also have far superior lasers than their previous versions, as they are able to overpower things like Navy battleships, or even Egghead's mechanized Sea Kings. Everyone on the island was also convinced that these lasers would be potent enough to kill Haki users like Bonney and Kuma themselves. But what is truly staggering are actually the numbers. Sentomaru says that there were 50 Mark III Pacifista on Egghead Island alone, meaning that in terms of pure manpower, the Pacifista overshadow most pirate groups we've seen in the story. I should, however, also point out that these Mark III Pacifista had their clear limits. They still ended up being overpowered quite easily by stronger characters like the Gorosei, or even by some of the New World Vice Admirals. In this sense, these clones of Kuma are essentially just very powerful foot soldiers, similar to some of the top-end squads we've seen on many of the Yonko crews. But there is one exception to this. This exception is called Esper, the Seraphim clone of Kuma, which, just like all other Pacifista modeled on him, is now at Bonney's beck and call. This thing is not only on a whole other level compared to the Mark III Pacifista, but is also basically just a far stronger version of the original Kuma. Esper not only has the same abilities as Bartholomew Kuma, but it also has all of the other upgrades that the Seraphim received. This means that Esper not only has Buccaneer traits, but also traits from both the Giants and the Lunarians. On top of the regular Pacifista modifications, the Lunarian traits are arguably by far the strongest abilities here, as they basically make Esper invulnerable. We've now seen him and other Seraphim be completely unaffected, even when taking attacks from the Emperors, where the only way the Straw Hats could truly stop them was by putting them inside these sea energy bubbles. I would also argue that among all the Seraphim we've so far been shown, Esper has by far the most powerful Devil Fruit ability, where through green blood, it has the exact same Niku Niku no Mi powers as the original Kuma. This power not only gives the user one of the best ways to travel in all of One Piece, but it's honestly one of the most supernatural devil fruits in the whole story. According to Kuma, this fruit not only allows its user to push and deflect physical things, such as air and other people, but to even do the same thing to theoretical concepts, like pain and even memories. This essentially makes this one of the most versatile devil fruits in all of One Piece, where it not only has the potential for basic things like combat and travel, but for all manner of other stuff, from healing to even psychological warfare. The way the story has also so far built up the power and potential of the Seraphim is probably something I should also mention. Vegapunk essentially treats the Seraphim as the crown jewel of his pacifista army, where he goes as far as calling them the strongest form of humanity. The existence of the Seraphim was actually the thing that made the world government decide that they no longer even needed to rely on the warlords of the sea, even though this was a group that included multiple pirates, whose bounties were in the billions. So far, the Seraphim have also shown incredibly fast growth, where even though they've only existed for a few years, they have already displayed devil fruit usage on the level of characters who've had these same powers for decades. What I personally think is that the combined military power of Esper and all the other pacifista modeled on Kuma is basically the same as Bonney having her own mini Emperor tier crew. The Mark III pacifista are arguably far stronger than a lot of the regular foot soldiers we've seen on the Emperor's crews, but also, based on everything we've been shown, Esper could genuinely give a lot of top Yonko officers a run for their money. Still, this does not mean that Bonney and the pacifista that she's able to command actually equal Yonko caliber power. After all, Bonney herself is clearly far from having the strength of an emperor. However, this is not the same as saying that Bonney is actually weak, as even though she is no Yonko, Bonney is genuinely insanely powerful, far more than I think most fans realize. But what is truly noteworthy about Bonney is that, like I said in the intro, she genuinely has more potential than any other character we've ever seen in the whole story. Next, I'd like to go over just how second to none truly Bonney's potential is, where she even surpasses the potential of literal emperors. Right before that though, just a simple request for anyone who's watched this video so far to subscribe to the channel. While Bonney during Sabaody might have had one of the lowest bounties of all of the Supernova, and while she might have been the only one of the group who was taken out entering the New World, this all gets put into perspective with the revelation that Bonney was only 9 years old at the time of the pre-time skip. This in itself is just nuts. At the age of 9, with barely any training or combat experience, Bonney was able to successfully lead a pirate crew made up completely of former civilians from the South Blue all the way to the New World. Almost no other One Piece character has even come close to doing something like this. Luffy himself was 17 when he set out to sea, and back when he was Bonney's age, despite having been trained by Garp, Luffy was still getting bullied by East Blue ruffians. This is however no fault of Luffy's, as practically all other One Piece characters are still weaklings at his age. This goes for basically all of the Straw Hats, but also even to children of some of the most powerful characters in the story. The actual freak is actually Bonney, who at 9 years old with no training or experience was able to accomplish something most hardened pirate crews died trying, but Bonney's stunts actually grow far crazier in the post-time skip. At just 11 years old, even after losing her crew, Bonney is able to escape from the Marines, to survive for potentially 2 years alone in the New World, to successfully infiltrate the Holy Land, and to even sail all the way to Egghead Island alone. But this is not even bringing up the battle strength she has shown after the time skip. Little 11-year-old Bonney is actually so good at using her devil fruit that she is able to beat New World Vice Admirals and even turn them into children without them being able to revert back. As the story has now confirmed that devil fruit powers can be cancelled with armament haki, the fact that these Vice Admirals could not turn back is just completely insane. Now that I've however mentioned haki, I should also bring up the fact that Bonney is able to use armament haki hardening, but this is also another thing that becomes a lot more insane when you consider her age. This feat makes Bonney the youngest confirmed character in all of One Piece to have been able to unlock armament haki hardening. For a comparison, the Monster Trio were all in their late teens when they were finally able to use armament haki, whereas someone like Robin is currently in her 30s and has still not had a single haki feat in the story. Bonney doing all of this at such a young age is just completely nuts, but what makes her progress even more nuts is that Bonney is entirely self-trained. Other prodigies in the story, like Sabo or Yamato, had some of the strongest people alive training and sparring with them when they were young, yet Bonney all this time has been completely alone, where it is even noted that Kuma actually discouraged her violent side. It is a genuinely difficult task to come up with any other character in One Piece who's gotten as strong as Bonney has at such a young age with so little support. Someone like Kosuki Oden, for example, was said to be born with monstrous strength, but even though he grew up in the New World and received 2 incredibly powerful swords from his family, Oden at 20 still seemingly had a very tough fight against someone like Ashura Doji. I'm gonna be honest though, from what we've been shown, Bonney at 11 would eat this 17-year-old version of Ashura for breakfast. As far as prodigies go, I feel like Bonney's only real competition in the whole series is honestly Big Mom, where she's literally the only other character in One Piece whose feats as a child match Bonney's. This is however Big Mom, the supposed natural calamity, whom Elbaf giants even thought of as a god of destruction. This may honestly be a theory worthy of its own video, where there might genuinely be something funky going on with pink hair in One Piece. It's not just Big Mom and Bonney, but multiple other characters in the manga who are born with pink hair end up being these forces of nature. Personally though, I do think that the explanation for Bonney's strength almost definitely has to come from her bloodline. Ginny was already strong enough to be one of the Revolutionary Army's commanders, even though just like Bonney, she had almost no background as a combatant. But I more so think that the likely source for Bonney's monstrous potential is almost guaranteed to come from her biological celestial dragon father. I might still make a video on this, but there's a ton of evidence that Bonney's father was actually Garling, and if Shanks is any reference, Bonney having Figarland blood could well explain why she's so abnormally talented. I would however next like to go over what the reason could be for the story making Jewelry Bonney of all characters this tremendously powerful and important in the final saga. I honestly don't think this was just something random done for the Egghead arc, where her now being able to command this army of pacifista and her having more potential than almost any other character in the story are in my opinion clearly set up for Bonney's greater role in the end game. This shouldn't really be too surprising, as the Worst Generation as a whole is one of the groups with by far the most build up for the story's climax. A part of the literal Laugh Tale prophecy actually foretells of not only Luffy's coming, but it also says that his entire pirate generation is going to be at the center of this final war. What I personally think this means is that it really is not just going to be Luffy and Blackbeard, but that other Worst Generation members like Law Kid and Bonney still have a hugely important part to play in the last few arcs of the manga. I think this is the likely reason Egghead decided to make Bonney so important, where after what happened to other supernova, such as Hawkins and Drake during Wano, the manga needed to seriously build up the remaining members of the Worst Generation for this Laugh Tale prophecy to still make sense. The final saga is also not just build up Bonnie's power, but her character is also set up to be involved in a number of future storylines. The question of Kuma's ultimate fate is still left hanging, but even beyond this, Bonney still has her own big personal storylines, such as her connection with her biological celestial dragon family, or the fact that Bonney has now for numerous times been tied up with the Revolutionary Army. What could however be the most important part that was introduced about Bonney during Egghead are her ties to Sun God Nika and to Luffy. I did not mention this in my breakdown of Bonnie's powers, because I genuinely do not think Bonnie's own Nika form is actually that powerful. The story clearly refers to it as basically just an illusion, where it has none of the strength Luffy's form actually gives him, rather than power. I do however think that this revelation has huge storytelling potential. There is possibly something about the visual Nika form itself that is actually really important, where at the end of Wano, the Five Elders deliberately did not want Luffy's bounty poster to show this form. While Bonnie's version may be an illusion, her turning into Nika could still have some unknown significance, where we already know that there are races in the One Piece world who actually view Nika as a literal god. Even beyond this though, now that Bonney knows that Luffy is not only someone who helped rescue her father, but also that he is basically her childhood idol, Bonney is clearly set up to be a huge ally for the Straw Hats. I personally think this is likely the big purpose of the story, giving her all of this military power, where it will all be used to help Luffy in this upcoming world war. Still, while I've talked a lot about Bonnie's Emperor level potential in this video, I do not honestly think that she will ever become an actual Yonko. This is only because it is very unlikely that we will see any new characters get this title in the story. This is because these current 4 emperors are pretty clearly set up to be 4 of the most significant players in the race for the One Piece. And Oda has personally admitted that the story will end once the treasure is found. Even if she won't have the title, Bonney is very clearly set up to be an emperor caliber figure before the story is over. I keep reiterating this point in a lot of my videos, and I've even brought it up in this video, but the Worst Generation is not just set up to surpass Roger's generation, but to completely eclipse it. Every bit of lore in the story says that the figures of this final war are basically going to be the most important people who've ever lived in this world. This is also more than likely the reason why the manga is so deliberately rushing to make someone who was a random side character like Bonney this tremendously important in the final saga. Still, even if this is the vision Oda and his team have for the story, it remains to be seen whether they've bitten off more than they can chew. We might still end up getting some abbreviated version, where even if Bonney was at some point supposed to be hugely important, there simply wasn't enough room in reality for it to actually happen. My own take from reading the manga for many years, and looking at all of Oda's interviews, is that Oda is basically just a madman, who'll either try finishing his story his way, or die trying. So yeah, 11-year-old Bonney beats 20-year-old Oden, and is basically going to be a mini Yonko in the final saga. Put it in the bank. I talked a lot in this video about the huge role the Worst Generation will likely play in the final saga, but this is not my only video going over this idea. If you're interested, you should click here to watch another video like this, where I go through an equally crazy journey that Roronoa Zoro might well undertake in the last few arcs. Thanks a lot to all my members for their support. I was supposed to upload my video about Imu and how his contracts work, but that script became something far bigger, and it might honestly take weeks for me to turn it into a video. Huge props to everyone who watched this video all the way to the end.